Vernick's ship descended into Earth's atmosphere with the precision of a needle threading its way through fabric. The sleek, multi-layered hull shimmered against the blue of the planet's sky. For all his vast experience in overseeing the integration of hundreds of species into the interstellar Concorde, he couldn't help but feel a slight unease as he watched the oceans and continents unfold beneath him. Earth was a world out of time, an anomaly in the sleek, controlled chaos of the Concorde's galaxy. Humans had a tendency to do the unexpected, and Vernick's job was to make sure the unexpected stayed in check. The moment his shuttle touched down on Earth's surface, a convoy of high-ranking UHF officials greeted him in a cold, precise manner that spoke volumes of their discipline. But Vernick didn't buy it. The human smile, the subtle shifts of body language, the way their eyes flicked to each other. There was something there. He felt it like a shift in the atmosphere, a carefully veiled hostility. Earth wasn't the fractured, war-torn world it had been centuries ago. It had become something more, something dangerous. The UHF representative, a woman named Sarah Vance, approached him with a handshake. Her grip was firm, but not overly so. Calculated. She had the aura of someone who had played the game of diplomacy for years. Too well. "Welcome to Earth, Auditor Vernick. We've been looking forward to your arrival," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes sharp. Vernick nodded, trying to gauge her. She was young by human standards, but the sharpness of her gaze suggested experience beyond her years. The way she spoke made it clear that she was not merely a figurehead. She was a leader in her own right. The official meetings began in earnest, and Vernick watched as the humans presented their case. They had built sprawling orbital stations, mining colonies on the Moon and Mars, and were close to achieving faster-than-light travel with the assistance of Concorde technology. But Vernick remained skeptical. Everything about humanity screamed unsustainable. Their war-torn history, their reliance on aggression for survival, their reliance on a combustible, unstable fuel source. Humans were not the type of species he'd want near the Concorde's advanced knowledge. "You've made impressive strides," Vernick began, a hint of condescension in his voice. "But your methods, your mindset, these will not serve you in the broader galaxy. There is order to be followed, regulations that must be obeyed. I'm afraid you're not ready for full integration." He gestured to the human-built ships and stations around them, brimming with potential, but still fundamentally human. Chaotic. Sarah's face remained composed, but something flickered in her eyes. "We don't need the Concorde to survive, Vernick. We've made our way through extinction-level events on our own. War, famine, disease. But we're still here. We're not asking to be granted anything. We're simply asking to have a place among the stars." Vernick smiled, sensing a weakness in her defiance. Humans were clearly proud, even arrogant, about their survival instincts. But that would be their downfall. He was sure of it. "You don't understand," Vernick said softly. "The Concorde doesn't allow species to enter the fold until they've demonstrated their ability to think beyond survival. You're still trapped in the cycle of violence." Sarah's eyes flashed. "We've been trapped in cycles for millennia, but we broke them. And that, Auditor, is the point. We don't need your permission to dream of the stars." Vernick's days on Earth grew longer, and the more he observed, the more he felt a rising disquiet gnaw at him. Humanity was, in his eyes, a species barely tamed by the weight of their own destructive tendencies. Earth's vast cities were impressive, but they still bore the scars of centuries of violence, conflict, and ecological ruin. How could such a species be ready for the complex web of interstellar diplomacy, where peace was an intricate dance of trust and mutual benefit? Yet the humans played their part in his diplomatic dance with unsettling grace. Every meeting, every speech, every gesture from Earth's leaders reinforced the illusion of compliance. At first, it was convincing. They agreed to the new treaties with disarming politeness, accepting the limits on their technological progress with quiet determination. Even when the Concorde imposed a series of harsh sanctions, the humans did nothing more than frown. They adapted, quickly. Vernick's briefing on the progress of his assignment confirmed his expectations. The human response was everything the Concorde had anticipated: obedient, docile, and above all, practical. Earth would remain a lesser power, a compliant species under the watchful eye of the Concorde. Their ships, now equipped with basic Concorde technology, were sluggish and clumsy compared to Concorde standards. Their industries were still primitive in comparison to the hyper-efficient factories of the Galactic Council. But there was a crack in the veneer. Vernick couldn't ignore it. Despite the outward calm, the humans had begun to feel the weight of the restrictions. There were whispers among their leaders, gatherings behind closed doors. Sarah Vance, who had appeared so composed at their first meeting, had started to show the faintest signs of unease. Her eyes would linger just a moment too long on the Concorde's heavily armed patrols, or she would shift uncomfortably when diplomatic decisions swung too far in the Concorde's favor. At one such meeting, Vernick caught a glance exchanged between Vance and a colleague of hers, a man named Andrew Marshall, the head of the Earth Defense Council. It was brief, but it was enough. Marshall's hand had twitched, a small but deliberate motion, like a signal, and Vernick's mind clicked into a new unsettling gear. What were they hiding? The next day, Vernick's team was granted permission to visit one of Earth's less developed colonies on Mars. The tour was meant to show Earth's adherence to the Concorde's directives. But as Vernick stepped off the shuttle, the sight of the colony unsettled him. It was far too pristine for a world supposedly under a restrictive, sanctioned regime. Mars should have looked like an aging outpost, a barren, tired world. But instead, the colony thrived. New structures glimmered in the low red light of the Martian sunset. There was technology here, and it was advanced. Far more advanced than the Concorde had allowed Earth to develop. It wasn't Concorde tech either. It was human-made, using principles Vernick recognized, but thought were far too dangerous for humans to discover so soon. What is this? Vernick's voice was sharp, though he masked it with a calm veneer. He turned to the tour guide, a human named Elena Torres, who stood beside him. Just a small experimental outpost, she said, her smile too practiced, her voice a little too tight. We've been testing new energy sources, recycling methods. It's not much. Vernick's gaze didn't leave the towering energy structures in the distance. Something was very wrong. This colony shouldn't be here. It shouldn't even exist. And yet, here it was. Proof of human ingenuity defying the very regulations the Concorde had imposed. His mind raced. As the tour continued, his eyes remained sharp, noticing the subtle signs. Underground tunnels, quick exchanges of coded messages, too many engineers who looked far too capable for a colony so insignificant. Vernick's doubts hardened into suspicion. Earth wasn't just complying. They were scheming. That night, Vernick received a new report, a message from his superiors. It was brief, curt. Increased surveillance on Mars. Human technology developments are surpassing expected limits. This may be more than an oversight. Vernick stared at the message, a grim realization settling in. Earth wasn't just biding its time. They were already moving beyond the constraints of the Concorde's restrictions. Vernick's suspicions quickly spiraled into paranoia. The more he dug into Earth's developments, the more he realized something fundamental had shifted. His superior officers had instructed him to keep Earth's technological advancements under tight control, yet every time he tried to pull the reins tighter, something slipped through the cracks. Small, almost insignificant anomalies at first, a minor sensor disruption here, an irregularity in energy readings there, but they were adding up. And they all pointed toward the same thing. Humans weren't playing by the Concorde's rules. The first real sign of sabotage came when Vernick's own ship, the Narration, a gleaming vessel that should have been impervious to any form of interference, was compromised while en route to the asteroid belt for routine supply runs. A minor glitch in its communication array, an odd occurrence that would have been shrugged off as a systems error, turned out to be anything but. The glitch was deliberate. Someone human, had sent a coded transmission that temporarily blinded the ship's sensors. In the void of space, the effect was devastating. The Narration lost its navigation control for a full 5 minutes, leaving it helpless as it drifted too close to a series of asteroid clusters. The resulting collision with a fragment of rock had nearly crippled the ship, its shields barely holding, its engines damaged beyond what Vernick would consider acceptable for any vessel under his command. A swift investigation, however, turned up nothing. No signs of hacking, no obvious traces of sabotage, just the odd, inexplicable interference. As he reviewed the logs again, Vernick couldn't shake the suspicion that the humans' technological tampering wasn't just isolated to a malfunction or glitch. It was deliberate, methodical, and impossible to trace with conventional Concord tech. Then the unthinkable happened. On Earth's lunar base, a Concord communications outpost went dark. No warning, no distress signal, just a sudden and complete loss of contact. A full investigation was ordered, and what Vernick found, was a catastrophe. The station had been entirely dismantled, the advanced Concord technology ripped out and replaced with something human. The very communication systems they relied on for interstellar coordination were now running on some form of technology that defied the known laws of physics. And there was something even more disturbing. The outpost had been repurposed. A new, non-registered, human-built ship was being constructed in secret at the base. It was crude, hastily built, but it had the unmistakable markings of Concord tech and human ingenuity. Vernick's mind raced as he mentally retraced the steps of his investigation. The technology on Earth had always been advancing at a surprising pace, but this was beyond what he had anticipated. No human had ever managed to replicate a Concord communications array to such a degree, let alone rewire it to function outside the usual parameters. Yet here it was. Someone was working tirelessly to subvert the very fabric of the Concord's control. Then it clicked. Earth wasn't just developing technology. They were reverse engineering it at an unprecedented rate. They were learning the Concord systems faster than Vernick could report it. His frustration mounted. The Concord's vast intelligence network should have seen this coming. They should have caught the anomalies earlier. But humans had a way of sneaking past the watchful eyes of even the most advanced systems. They didn't just build things. They adapted. They learned. He sent a direct message to his superiors, warning them of the new development, but the response was quick and clear. Increased monitoring is required. Earth's technological breach will not be tolerated. We will reinforce the blockade. But Vernick knew that Earth's resistance was far more dangerous than the Concord anticipated. Their ingenuity wasn't just impressive, it was terrifying. They didn't need permission to innovate. They had been innovating for centuries, despite their constant wars, their plagues, their environmental collapses. They had built themselves from the ashes of extinction, and now they were building something more, something that could not be stopped. The battle for Earth's autonomy had begun, but what Vernick hadn't realized was that Earth had already made its first move, and it wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. It was about shaping the future. The realization struck Vernick like a blow. Despite all his efforts to keep humanity within the confines of Concord's control, they had done the unthinkable. Earth had outdone them. Vernick's hands shook as he reviewed the reports sent from the outpost near Mars. A human ship, a vessel of crude, almost primitive design, had managed to enter faster than light travel using a Concord slip drive. It wasn't supposed to be possible. The Concord had been the sole masters of this technology for centuries, the very basis of interstellar travel. No other species had ever even come close to replicating the technology. The slip drive's complexity was such that even a race as advanced as the Velthor had failed in their attempts to reverse engineer it. It was the one secret the Concord kept tightly locked, its mechanisms embedded in layers of encryption and countermeasures. Yet, this human ship had done it. And it wasn't an accident. The ship didn't just appear at random, like some freak of nature. No, it had deliberately folded space and slipped through hyperspace, appearing thousands of light years away in an instant, leaving behind nothing but a faint distortion in spacetime. How? Vernick muttered aloud as he stared at the data. This wasn't just a breakthrough. It was a violation. Humanity had pierced the Concorde's greatest achievement like a needle through paper. They had cracked the most tightly guarded secret in the galaxy. Vernick's mind raced. If Earth had figured out the slip drive, what else had they discovered? Could they replicate it? Could they build a fleet of these ships and challenge the Concorde's supremacy in the stars? His gut told him they could. Humans had a strange, almost terrifying way of adapting. And now they had a way to move faster than anything the Concorde could track. The breakthrough was so significant that Vernick knew he couldn't report it in the usual way. He couldn't risk an ordinary dispatch to his superiors. This wasn't just a technological leap. It was a declaration of war. He called an emergency meeting with the Concorde's high command, requesting urgent clearance to examine the human ship. The order came swiftly. Send a team to investigate immediately. But Vernick had already prepared for the worst. The human ship wasn't just a simple craft. It was the cornerstone of Earth's rebellion. It was proof that they were far beyond the Concorde's reach. As his shuttle descended toward the lunar base, where the ship had been recovered, Vernick's mind was a blur. The base looked deceptively calm, a small beacon of order in the chaos of interstellar diplomacy. But as he approached the dock, his stomach twisted. The human vessel stood there, almost mocking in its simplicity, sleek, functional, and completely alien. The Concorde's sensors hummed with unease as they tried to penetrate its hull, but their readings only returned more questions than answers. "This is impossible," Vernick whispered under his breath as he studied the ship's strange architecture. The ship was constructed from materials never seen before, a hybrid of human ingenuity and Concorde technology. But it wasn't the materials that unsettled him. It was the energy signature. It wasn't just a slip drive. The energy required to power this device, the sheer force of it, defied all logic. Human ships couldn't handle the stresses of FTL travel without catastrophic damage. Yet this ship had not only survived, it had thrived. "This is not possible," Vernick said again, his voice rising with a sense of mounting panic. No human could have built this, unless... The thought hit him with an icy clarity. They didn't just reverse engineer our slip drive. They'd made it their own. Humans hadn't just learned how to use Concorde technology. They had mastered it. They had surpassed the Concorde's greatest technological achievement, blending their own ingenuity with that of the Concorde's highest secrets. A knot tightened in Vernick's chest. This wasn't just a minor breach. This was a game changer. And worse, this human ship, this singular piece of innovation, was a symbol. It was a rallying point for humanity's defiance. For the first time since his arrival on Earth, Vernick felt fear. True fear. Humans had never been just about survival. They had always fought for something more, something grander, something that transcended mere existence. And now they had discovered the one thing the Concorde couldn't afford to lose: freedom of movement in the stars. Vernick stood frozen before the ship, realization settling in like a cold weight. Earth wasn't just rebelling. It was positioning itself to be a force that could reshape the galaxy itself. Vernick had barely stepped off the shuttle before a high-ranking officer from the Concorde delegation met him, her face pale with concern. "Auditor Vernick," she began, her voice tight, "we've received new intelligence. Earth has activated a network of ships, more than we anticipated. They're spreading out beyond their borders." Vernick's heart dropped. The slip drive breakthrough wasn't an isolated incident. The humans had already begun to scale up their efforts. They had made the leap from an experimental vessel to a full-scale fleet in record time. That was the true horror of the situation. How quickly they adapted, how relentlessly they pushed boundaries. "You're certain?" Vernick asked, his voice low, though his mind was racing. "Fully confirmed," the officer replied, handing him a tablet. The screen flickered, and Vernick's eyes scanned the data. a series of rapid expansions across the solar system. New ships being deployed to the outer reaches of the Kuiper Belt, military posts popping up on Mars, the Moon, and even Io. Their reach was growing exponentially, and with each passing day, the Concorde's stranglehold on Earth weakened. The ships themselves were unlike any Vernick had ever seen. Some bore a resemblance to the original human ship that had used the slip drive, but others were more refined, sleeker, more powerful. They weren't just using the Concorde's technology. They were improving upon it. Each ship was equipped with advanced weaponry and shields, potentially surpassing the defensive capabilities of the Concorde's standard fleet. "They've been building this up for months," Vernick muttered, a sick realization creeping into his chest. "The lunar station, the Mars outposts, they've been preparing in secret." The officer nodded grimly. "They'd been hiding in plain sight, Auditor. All this time, we thought Earth was adhering to the Concorde's regulations. We underestimated them." Vernick clenched his fists, fighting against the rising tide of frustration and dread. How could he have missed it? How could he have been so blind? It was clear now that the humans hadn't just been waiting for the Concorde's permission to join the interstellar fold. They had been preparing for this moment. Earth had always been a rogue world, its survival instincts honed to a razor's edge, and now that edge had been sharpened into a weapon capable of challenging the very foundation of the Concorde's power. The officer continued, "There's more. Earth's leaders, specifically Sarah Vance and Andrew Marshall, have been rallying support within the human colonies. They're not just preparing for battle. They're preparing for an uprising. They believe the galaxy doesn't need the Concorde's oversight, and they're spreading that message among the colonies." Vernick turned to look at the officer, his face hardening. "They're building an alliance. They don't just want freedom. They want dominance." For the first time since his arrival on Earth, Vernick wasn't certain of his position. He had been sent here to oversee the human species' compliance with Concorde regulations. But the humans had done far more than simply resist. They had launched a full-scale insurgency. And worse, they had done it under the Concorde's very nose. "We need to strike first," Vernick said, his voice icy. "If we wait any longer, we'll lose control of the situation entirely. Earth's resistance must be crushed before it spreads any further." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "I'll alert the fleet. But, Auditor, if we do this, it will mean war." Vernick stared at the officer, a sense of inevitability sinking in. He had spent his career enforcing the Concorde's will, believing that order could be maintained through compliance and regulation. But the humans had shown him something that could not be ignored. They didn't bend. They fought for their own future, no matter the cost. As Vernick turned to leave, a single thought ran through his mind. The Concorde had underestimated humanity, and that mistake could cost them everything. The decision was made swiftly. The Concorde's fleet would mobilize immediately, its commanders briefed on the new directive. Earth must be brought to heel. Vernick, still reeling from the shock of humanity's sudden defiance, stood on the bridge of the Talon, a command ship large enough to dwarf most of Earth's fledgling vessels. Yet, as he gazed at the star-streaked expanse ahead, it wasn't the size of their ships that bothered him. It was the knowledge that this war would not be a swift victory. Humanity's ingenuity had already turned the tide in their favor, and the galaxy's most powerful empire had underestimated them. The orders were clear: strike at Earth's primary military outposts, Mars, the Moon, and the lunar stations. Crush their fleet before they can fully deploy. A war council had been convened in the heart of the Concorde's flagship fleet, and Vernick had been assigned as the primary observer. However, even as he stood among the fleet commanders, the disquiet within him deepened. The faces around him were confident, but the air was thick with tension. There was something about this conflict that felt wrong, as if they were no longer simply fighting a rebellion, but something far more complex. They were not facing a weaker species anymore. They were facing a force that had cracked the Concorde's most impenetrable secrets. Vernick leaned over the digital table, his gaze fixed on the holomap of Earth's system. The new fleet humanity had assembled was positioned on the outer reaches of the solar system, but there were already signs that Earth's forces were ready for combat. Earth wasn't going to wait for them to strike first. They were preparing for a war of their own, a war where the Concord's overwhelming superiority in numbers and technology might not be enough. "They're not running," Vernick muttered under his breath. "They're preparing." Commander Relka, a seasoned veteran of the Concord military, turned to him with a raised brow. "What do you mean?" "They've adapted faster than we expected," Vernick explained, his voice tight. "The ships we've seen, the ones with the slip drive technology, they've been building more. They're spreading them across the system. And they're not just using Concord tech. They've combined it with their own, modified it, even. They're prepared for this fight." Ralka studied the holomap. "It doesn't matter how many ships they have. They're outclassed. We'll overwhelm them, just as we've done with every other species that try to resist." Vernick shook his head. "I don't think you understand. They're not just fighting to survive. They're fighting for something bigger. They've spent centuries surviving. Now they've found a way to win." Ralka scoffed. "We'll see about that." The tension grew as the fleet moved closer to Mars. The first strike was set to commence in a few hours, but Vernick couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had more surprises in store. His mind turned back to the data he had studied so far. The improvised slip drives, the hybrid technology, and the covert operations on Earth's colonies. Humanity wasn't just trying to defend itself. They were trying to change the rules of the game. "We'll see their true strength soon enough," Ralka said as he looked out at the darkness of space. "And when we do, it'll be too late for them." But Vernick wasn't so sure. He couldn't ignore the feeling that this was no longer just a matter of military superiority. Earth had thrown the first punch, but they had also ignited a fire that could burn the entire galaxy. Vernick couldn't predict how this war would end, but he knew one thing: Earth wasn't going to go down quietly. As the Talon approached Mars, a sudden alert flashed across Vernick's screen. It was an encrypted transmission. He opened it, his eyes scanning the incoming data. The message was short but chilling. "The first wave has launched. Earth has gone on the offensive." The human ships had already made their move. The war had begun, and with it, an unexpected ferocity. Earth's ships, smaller, faster, and more maneuverable than the Concord's massive warships, struck like lightning. The first wave hit the lunar stations with devastating speed, bypassing the Concord's outer defenses by using the newly perfected slip drive. They arrived without warning, their hulls cloaked by the same technological marvel that had allowed them to break free of the Concord's technological chains. Vernick watched in horror as the initial skirmish unfolded. The Concord fleet had underestimated humanity's ability to strategize and innovate. Within minutes, the moon's defense stations were under siege. The human vessels, though fewer in number, weaved through the chaos of the larger Concord ships, their weapons ripping through the outer defenses like a hot knife through butter. Concord forces struggled to regain control, deploying fighter squads and heavy artillery, but Earth's forces had already claimed the high ground, both technologically and tactically. The message came through swiftly, a simple transmission from one of the moon's fallen stations. "We've lost control of the defenses. They're too quick. Retreating." "Damn it," Vernick cursed, slamming his fist on the armrest of his command chair. His mind spun. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The Concorde was supposed to be invincible, but the humans, defiant, relentless, had outmaneuvered them at every turn. The battle on the moon wasn't an isolated incident. On Mars, Earth's fleet struck next, catching the Concorde's forces off guard. They launched waves of attacks, using guerrilla tactics, skirting through the asteroid belts to strike when the Concorde ships were least prepared. The human fleet wasn't large, but its adaptability gave it a deadly advantage. They knew how to take advantage of every vulnerability, every blind spot in the Concorde systems. Vernick stood on the bridge of the Talon, watching as the human ships cut through the Concorde's forces. One of the fleet commanders, a veteran named Turl, was pacing back and forth, his expression grim. "Sir, we've sustained heavy losses in the first wave. It's not just the speed of their ships. Their weaponry is precise. They're targeting our weak points and hitting our engines, our fuel reserves. We're not prepared for this level of efficiency." Vernick clenched his teeth. His fingers hovered over the command console, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't a battle he had expected to fight. The Concorde had long held the advantage in space warfare, but humanity wasn't playing by the same rules. They weren't simply defending their planet. They were fighting to reshape the future. Send a message to the fleet. We need to regroup, reassess, and make sure the reserve ships are prepared for a second offensive. The longer this goes on, the more of our resources we lose. As the words left his mouth, Vernick felt the crushing reality of their situation. The Concorde was now facing a two-front war. Earth's forces were spread across the system, launching coordinated strikes on key strategic locations. The Concorde's resources were stretched thin, unable to respond quickly enough to the unpredictable movements of the human fleet. Vernick knew that the coming weeks would be critical. If they didn't stabilize their position soon, the war would tip in Earth's favor. The price of defiance, Vernick realized, was never just measured in lives lost. It was measured in the ability to adapt, to take risks, to learn from every failure. And as humanity fought on with a strength born from centuries of oppression, it became painfully clear to Vernick that they had the one thing the Concorde could never truly understand: the will to never surrender. "Are we prepared to pay that price?" Vernick asked, his voice barely a whisper, more to himself than to anyone else. But as the next wave of human ships approached, he knew the answer. No one had anticipated how far humanity would go. No one had understood the depths of their resolve. The war had raged for months, and the tides were shifting in a way Vernick could no longer ignore. The Concorde's once unstoppable fleet had been battered, its resources drained, its morale shattered. Earth's forces, though still smaller in number, had turned the fight into something far greater than a simple rebellion. This was a revolution built on the human spirit of perseverance, innovation, and sheer determination. Vernick stood at the helm of the Talon, his gaze fixed on the swirling chaos of the battlefield just outside the ship's windows. The final offensive was underway. The fleet had regrouped, drawn the humans into a concentrated engagement near the outer rim of the solar system. It was a desperate gamble, but it was all they had left. If they could break through Earth's defensive line and strike at the heart of their military infrastructure, they might still have a chance to regain control. But even as the Talon sped toward its target, Vernick's thoughts weren't on victory. They were on the unimaginable losses the Concorde had already suffered. Ships that had once been symbols of their empire's dominance were now little more than debris drifting in the void. The human fleet, though still vastly outnumbered, had shown a resilience that no one had predicted. "You're quiet, Auditor," said Commander Relka, his voice harsh with fatigue. "You're not planning to surrender now, are you?" Vernick didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as a human ship, a sleek, agile craft, danced through the firestorm of laser blasts and plasma torpedoes. The human pilot executed a series of impossible maneuvers, dodging even the most precise shots from their ships. It was a level of resourcefulness Vernick had come to fear. "No," Vernick replied finally, his voice steady but lacking its earlier certainty. "But we're running out of options, and we've already lost too much." Ralka's gaze darkened. "I won't let that happen. We've come this far. The Concorde's legacy will endure. We can't just let a few humans destroy it." Vernick turned away, eyes hardening. His sense of duty to the Concorde had once been unwavering, but now the cost of that loyalty had become clearer than ever. The Concorde's ideals of order and control, of maintaining peace through power, had never considered the true complexity of the universe. It had never accounted for the unyielding resolve of a species like humanity, one that had fought for survival at every turn, one that had learned and adapted at a pace unimaginable to even the most advanced species. "Not if we don't change," Vernick muttered, almost to himself. "Not if we keep underestimating them." His voice was drowned out by a sudden alert flashing on the command screen. A ripple of panic shot through the bridge as the fleet's sensors detected a massive fleet of human ships, far larger than any they had encountered before. They weren't just defending now. They were coming for them. The human forces had broken through the outer defenses and were advancing on the Concorde's flagship. Vernick's heart raced as he realized the implications. They were not only winning, they were about to take the fight directly to the core of the Concorde Empire. The human fleet had found their opening, and they would not hesitate to press it. As the battle raged on, Vernick made a decision that would haunt him forever. He sent a private transmission to the leaders of Earth, offering a ceasefire, a chance to negotiate a peaceful resolution, to end the war before it destroyed everything. But as he hit the send button, he knew, deep down, that the Concorde's time was over. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, one where Earth would no longer be shackled by the will of an empire, but would chart its own course, for better or for worse. The humans had won, and in their victory, they had carved out a future that would no longer be dictated by the ancient monolithic powers of the galaxy. The dawn of humanity's era had arrived.